Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I've had a few people ask me lately, what are my thoughts on cheat reps? Are they useful? Are they just dangerous? Are they silly? Are they ego lifting? Do they serve a purpose to increase overload? What do you think? So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, do a little bit of crafting, and let's talk about this. All right, because kind of the question that always comes up that people have very strong, very dogmatic opinions on cheat reps. There are people who believe that loose form, sloppy form, a little bit of English on it, creates more overload, allows for more growth, and they are massive advocates of it, doing it on most exercises. There are people who believe that strictly isolating a muscle is best, and that cheat reps and loose form, as far as using, again, other muscles to move a weight that aren't considered normally primary movers, that it's dangerous, it's ego lifting, and it actually reduces growth. The truth is, in my opinion, the real truth is somewhere in between the two. I don't take a dogmatic approach on this. I think both sides have valid points, and I think it's got to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. And I think cheat reps, like anything else, are another tool in the toolbox. They have their uses, they have their benefits, and they have their downsides. So let's talk about that a little bit. All right, as far as the actual strict form aspect, as far as muscle recruitment goes, I don't believe that. There's no reason to think that's true when you look at biomechanics, you look at loading of muscles. You see all these bodybuilders who will say, oh, you've got to focus on the muscle. Do your concentration curls strictly and focus on the muscle and isolating just that muscle, whatever it takes to isolate the biceps. Yet all these guys who do this end up shooting stuff in their biceps. Meaning, if what they were doing was so effective, why did they feel the need to inject synthol, inject anabolics, inject collagen, everything else into those same muscles that they're talking about how effective it is to isolate and concentrate on? If that was working so well, why are they having to inject so much stuff into them? It's kind of one of the questions I always ask. It's not working very well for you, is it? If you're having to add 2 inches with oil, your method's not working, not doing too well. So, when we really look at it, what makes muscles grow? Tension. If you use a little bit of English and slack and swing in an exercise and add more weight on the bar accordingly, are you really reducing tension on the muscle? No, you're not. You're not reducing tension on the muscle because you still might be lifting the same amount of weight with that muscle itself. If you've increased the weight 10% or 20% and you're cheating it up, you might still be lifting the same amount of weight with the bicep or your pecs or your lats or whatever exercise, so whatever muscle we're talking about. However, there is the added benefit of there being a cumulative effect of other muscles getting work, meaning isolating a muscle. There's no evidence to suggest that trying to isolate it makes it grow faster. If that was the case, then why do we have so many studies indicating that in many cases a lat pull down or a weighted chin up produce more bicep stimulation than a curl does? Those are anything but isolating the bicep. And in some cases, we've got studies showing a lat pull down causing greater growth than a curl in the bicep. It's using 6 or 7 different muscles, including muscles way bigger, moving a lot more weight. Weighted chin up, same thing. A lot of people think of that as a back exercise. We've seen studies where it shows enormous amounts of bicep recruitment. So this idea that isolating a muscle is going to make it grow more just isn't true. In fact, that splashover effect of working other muscles is another topic entirely. But we'll get to some downsides to this in a minute too. As there are downsides. There are absolutely downsides to using loose form. But let's cover kind of what your benefits are there. So you've got that. You might be doing the same amount of work as far as the concentric, the lifting of the weight. However, again, I always say, and this is where the contradiction comes in, I tell people eccentric reps are not necessary for muscle growth. They're a factor. They're a useful tool, just like we're talking about cheat reps. These things are useful tools in your toolbox, but none of these tools are absolutely essential for growth. They're not essential for adaptation. They're not essential to getting bigger and stronger. They're just tools in the toolbox. Some of the tools can be thrown out and you still get just as good of results. Eccentric reps can make you grow. And eccentric reps can make you grow. They're not required to make you grow. You can get massive, completely skipping eccentrics and doing lifts where you turn loose of the bar and let it drop. All right, you could run a program like that and get just as big. Now, that doesn't mean that eccentrics don't stimulate muscle growth, because they do. They do stimulate muscle growth. They're just only part of your total workload. Now, a lot of cheat reps, what do they do on the eccentric end? You cheat the weight up, but the lower end, you end up taking a heavier load on the eccentric, the lowering portion, than you normally would if you had done strict form? Are they an effective means of eccentric overload for stimulating muscle growth? Yes, on some exercises they are, but you know what? That's a case-by-case basis. In order to determine that, you can't just say, oh, every exercise that's true. You need to actually look at the exercise. Look at what's going on with it. Assess it yourself. Watch yourself do it in the mirror. Watch how you take the eccentric rep on a cheat curl or a barbell row and look and see if you actually are having to work that muscle that you're trying to work on the eccentric portion more. Watch it. Watch in the mirror. See what's going on. Maybe see how it feels. All right. There's that factor to consider. There is also the factor to consider that there is a splashover effect. People say things like, well, those little bitty cheat movements and different things, they don't cause muscle growth in those other muscles. Yeah, they absolutely do. I'll give you an example. I was doing push presses in a video a while back, and I literally had people come on Instagram and tell me that my shoulders would grow better if I quit cheating the weight up. They clearly aren't aware that the push press is a universally used strength and conditioning exercise by professional athletes around the globe. They're completely oblivious to that fact because they were probably a bodybuilder. The push press is a cheat rep. You were cheating the weight up a little bit, using a little bit of leg drive to get the weight started for your overhead press. What have we seen on studies on the push press? Anybody looked at them? What do they do to the quads? The push press, even for someone who can squat 400 pounds, doing a 200-pound push press, just using their thighs to get it started a little bit, EMGs light up in their quads. They light up enormously. In fact, certain things showed that on the push press, some of your upper threshold muscle fibers responsible for explosiveness and speed and power get heavily activated on the push press. In fact, the speed and force generation in the quads on the push press, it's one of the highest exercises ever when we actually measure it. The force acceleration caused by the quads in it is extreme. It is actually an explosive power builder in the quads. Now, if it's recruiting upper threshold fibers in your quads, is it going to make them grow? Ask that question again for people who don't understand. If you are heavily recruiting muscle fibers in your quads doing an exercise, will it make it grow? Yes. Recruiting muscle fibers is how you stimulate growth. So if the push press is a little cheating movement and it's little bitty, just a few inches of movement with the thighs is enough to cause growth in the thighs and strength increase in your thighs, why doesn't that work on a lot of these other exercises where you're using a little bit of slack, using a little bit of cheat just to get it moving? Of course it's going to cause growth in various other muscles. Of course it's going to cause growth. Now, the downsides. The downsides. Number one, loose form on some exercises can make it easier to get hurt. All right. Is it ego lifting? Maybe. Are you doing it as a tool to where you're carefully assessing the type of cheating you're doing on an exercise and making sure it's benefiting you? Or are you just using shitty form to fling heavier weight around? And are you doing so in a way that's going to cause you to rip something? Yeah, you might actually be doing something that's dangerous. It might actually have a higher injury rate. Some of these exercises are fine. You know what? Using a little cheat on your rows isn't going to hurt you 99% of the time. Doing a push press isn't going to hurt you. You're cheating the weight up a little bit. But there are exercises where it could, in theory, hurt you. Those aren't, but there's a lot of them where it could. How about using really shitty form on a bench press where you bounce it off your chest and then lift your ass off the bench? How about a cheat rep like that? Could that hurt you? Yeah, that could fucking hurt you. You're ego lifting at that point. It's not helping you overload anything. When you're using inertia to bounce weights, when you're doing jerky movements to bounce weights, that's ego lifting. That's going to hurt you. That's not a cheat rep. That's not a controlled cheat rep where you're adding extra muscles. You're just flinging shit around in a way to appease your ego that can get you hurt. Number two, people try to do them at the end of a set. A lot of bodybuilders do that. It's silly because you're losing all the benefits. All you're doing is reducing load on the muscle. If you're taking the same weight and you're cheating on the last few reps just so you can squeeze out a few more reps, do you really think you're recruiting upper threshold fibers doing that? No, you're using less weight on the muscle. If you had done the whole set that way, you would be overloading the muscle pretty good. You would also be recruiting other muscles through the body, different stabilizers. You could be having a benefit. If you're just cheating on the last few reps, you're basically not really working those other muscles as much because they're not getting a full set. They're not getting a heavy weight. You're just doing it to try to squeeze a little more out in the next muscle. So you're almost just doing a drop set. What have we seen on the studies in drop sets? Do they cause extra growth more than just waiting long enough to regain strength? No. You would be better off if you want to do additional work beyond your work set for a muscle. You need to take a break and add another work set with the same weight. What we generally find is that anytime you do a full set for a muscle, if anything, and immediately after you reduce workload on it and weight, you don't gain as much muscle. So if you do a really short break and then do a lighter weight, you don't gain as much muscle from it as if you had just waited longer and used the same heavy weight again for good form. The same would in theory apply to using cheat reps at the end. You're just putting less tension on the muscle. It's not really doing as much for you as you might hope. It's just extending your set and maybe impeding your recovery. It's not going to help you that much. It's just not a good practice, and you lose the other benefits of doing the cheat reps. The other big downfall to the cheat reps, and this is a big one, you have no way to control tension sometimes. Meaning when your form is sloppy and you're using cheat reps to do things, unless you can perfectly replicate the exact same amount of slack or English you're putting into the movement every single time you do the exercise month after month, you have no way to assess your progressive overload. You don't know if you're overloading the muscle more because you could be putting more cheat on it. So you might have gained reps, you might be adding weight to the bar, but if your technique and the amount of slack that you use changes, you can't accurately track your progressive overload. It's hard for you to program your training. It's hard for you to assess your progress. And if you can't do that, you can't accurately assess your progress or program around it, it could be hurting your gains in the long term because it gives you less feedback for you to use to determine what you're doing. Because you're changing the amount of tension on the muscle without being able to regulate how much of the tension is coming differently when you're adding reps and adding weight, if you're changing the technique over time because you're cheating more as you go. So you might be shortchanging yourself in that regard because it is about tension. And if you're reducing tension on the muscle by cheating even more as you progress and add stuff, you might not actually be progressing with your workload as much as you think you are. And it's going to cause you to make mistakes in your programming, determining maxes, all sorts of stuff. It can be a programming nightmare for you unless you are consistently using the exact same form every time. And that is one advantage that strict form does have over looser form. It is easier to track your progress and know how much extra tension you're putting on the muscle, and that's not an insignificant thing. So to answer the question, it's not really a good or a bad thing. It's one tool in the toolbox. It can be good in some cases. It can be bad in others. You can use it appropriately or you could use it inappropriately. So ultimately, both sides of the debate are right. Both sides have valid points. And the real truth of the matter is somewhere in between the two. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.